Every person you pass has a story they've never told, a story that changed them forever. Welcome to another chapter. Let's begin. The hardest decisions in life aren't always about choosing between right and wrong. Sometimes they're about choosing between helping someone you love and protecting the life you've spent years building. If you had met me 5 years ago, you would have seen a man who finally felt like life was falling into place. My name is Michael, and after years of working long hours in Germany, I accepted a better opportunity in Switzerland. It wasn't an easy decision. Leaving behind familiar streets, old friends, and my family meant starting over in a country where everything, from the language to the culture, felt unfamiliar. But I believe that sometimes the biggest rewards come from taking the biggest risks. The first year wasn't glamorous. I rented a small apartment just outside Zurich, worked overtime whenever I could, and spent my weekends exploring a country that seemed almost too beautiful to be real. Snow-covered mountains surrounded quiet towns, trains arrived exactly on time, and people valued honesty and hard work above almost everything else. Slowly, Switzerland stopped feeling like a place I worked. It started feeling like home. My career flourished, and for the first time in my adult life, I wasn't living paycheck to paycheck. I wasn't rich by any means, but I had stability, I had savings. Most importantly, I had peace of mind. There was only one thing missing, someone to share it with. Then I met Sarah. It happened in the most ordinary way possible. A mutual friend invited us both to a weekend barbecue, and we spent nearly 3 hours talking without realizing everyone else had already gone inside for dessert. She was intelligent, funny, and refreshingly honest. There was no pretending, no games, just two adults talking about life, family, and the strange paths that had brought us together. Before the evening ended, I asked if she'd like to have dinner sometime. She smiled. I was wondering how long it was going to take you. That dinner turned into another, then another. Within months, we were practically inseparable. Sarah had 2 sons from a previous marriage. Ethan was 19, while his younger brother Liam had just turned 16. The boys lived with their biological father, but they visited often, especially during school holidays. At first I was nervous. Dating someone with children is different. You're not just hoping one person likes you. You're hoping an entire family accepts you. Thankfully, Liam made that easy. He was mature beyond his years, curious about everything, and always asking thoughtful questions. We bonded over hiking, soccer, and our shared love of fixing anything mechanical. He reminded me a lot of myself when I was his age. Ethan, on the other hand, was harder to figure out. He wasn't rude, just distant. Some days he was friendly and talkative. Other days he'd barely look up from his phone. I figured he simply needed time. After all, I wasn't trying to replace his father. I just wanted him to know that if he ever needed someone, I'd be there. As the months passed, Sarah and I grew even closer. She eventually moved to Switzerland, and together we started building the kind of future we'd both hoped for. A small apartment became a larger one. Weekend trips became traditions. Late-night conversations turned into plans for the years ahead. One snowy evening, overlooking Lake Zurich as Christmas lights reflected across the water, I asked Sarah to marry me. She didn't hesitate. Yes, it felt like the beginning of the next chapter of my life. A stable career, a woman I loved, 2 boys I was slowly getting to know. Everything seemed to be falling perfectly into place. A woman I loved, 2 boys I was slowly getting to know. Everything seemed to be falling perfectly into place. Looking back now, I realize I was so focused on the future that I completely missed the quiet warning signs hiding in the present. Because while Liam was preparing for adulthood, Ethan was slowly heading down a very different path. About a year after we got engaged, Sarah finally made the move to Switzerland. Watching her walk through the arrivals gate at Zurich Airport with 2 suitcases and an exhausted smile is a moment I'll never forget. It finally felt like we could stop living in 2 different countries and start building one life together. The first few months were exactly what we'd hoped for. We explored little mountain villages on weekends, discovered our favorite cafes, and spent evenings planning what our wedding would look like. It wasn't anything extravagant. Neither of us cared about a huge ceremony. We just wanted a simple life, a peaceful one. Of course, there was one thing Sarah couldn't leave behind, her boys. Although they still lived with their father, she called them almost every day. Sometimes the conversations lasted only a few minutes. Other times, she'd spend nearly an hour laughing with Liam or checking in on Jake. As a mother, she worried constantly. I understood that. If anything, the distance made her even more protective. Liam seemed to be doing well. He was focused on finishing school, already talking about university and what he wanted to do with his future. Jake, however, had become harder to read. Whenever I asked how he was doing, Sarah usually answered before he could. "He's figuring things out. He's just under a little stress. He's been hanging out with new friends." None of those answers sounded alarming, at least not at first. One evening while we were having dinner, Sarah casually mentioned that Jake had started seeing someone. "Her name's Chloe," she said with a smile. "I guess that's serious?" "I think so. Have you met her?" She hesitated for just a second. "Only over video calls." "And?" Sarah shrugged. "I don't know yet." That was unusual. Normally, Sarah formed opinions about people almost immediately. The fact that she couldn't tell whether she liked Chloe made me curious. Still, relationships are complicated. I didn't think much of it. A few weeks later, I noticed Sarah becoming increasingly distracted. She checked her phone constantly. Sometimes she'd leave the room to answer calls. Other times, she'd sit quietly staring at the screen long after the conversation had ended. "Everything okay?" I asked one night. She forced a smile. "Yeah. You sure? It's just... Jake. What happened?" "I don't really know." That answer bothered me more than if she had simply told me something was wrong. Over the following days, the calls became more frequent. Sometimes late at night because of the time difference, sometimes early in the morning before work. I never tried listening. I figured if Sarah wanted to tell me, she would. Then one Saturday morning, I found her sitting alone on our balcony. She looked pale. Her coffee had gone cold. She hadn't even touched it. The moment she looked up at me, I knew something had happened. I got a call from Jake. I sat beside her. "What is it?" She took a deep breath before speaking. "Chloe's ex-boyfriend is getting out of prison." I frowned. "Prison?" She nodded. "He was arrested for assault and drug trafficking." For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Sarah continued. "Jake says the guy has been sending messages through mutual friends." "What kind of messages?" She swallowed. "That when he gets out, he's coming for both of them." I wasn't sure what to think. People make threats all the time. Some are serious, most aren't. But looking at Sarah, I could see she wasn't treating this as an empty warning. She was terrified. "What does Jake want to do?" I asked. "He wants to leave." "Leave where?" She looked directly at me. "Here." I blinked. "Switzerland?" She nodded. "He thinks it's the only place they'll be safe." The request caught me completely off guard. Jake moving here was one thing, but Chloe too? Neither of them had jobs. Neither of them spoke German. Neither of them had any experience living abroad. "You know how difficult immigration is," I said carefully. "I know." "They'd need work permits." "I know." "They'd need stable jobs." "I know." Every answer came faster than the last, almost as if she'd already rehearsed the conversation in her head. Then she reached across the table and gently took my hand. "Michael." Her voice cracked. "I need your help." At that moment, I thought the biggest question was whether we could give two young people a fresh start. I had no idea the real question was whether bringing them into our lives would destroy everything we'd worked so hard to build. After that conversation, our lives seemed to revolve around one question. How do we get Jake to Switzerland? At first, I approached it like a problem that simply needed solving. I spent evenings researching work permits, residency requirements, and employment opportunities. Switzerland wasn't the kind of place where someone could just arrive and hope everything worked out. If you wanted to stay, you needed a legitimate job, financial stability, and a willingness to follow the rules. I figured if Jake was serious about starting over, we'd help him prepare before he ever got on a plane. So I called him. "I've been looking into jobs," I told him. "There are opportunities in construction, warehouses, and manufacturing. They pay well if you're willing to work hard." "Yeah," he replied. "That sounds good." "Do you have an updated resume?" "I'll make one." "How soon?" There was a long pause. "Probably this weekend." That weekend came and went. No resume. The following week, I asked again. "I'm still working on it." Another week passed, then another excuse. "My laptop's broken." I've been busy. I forgot. They were small things, nothing that proved he wasn't serious. But they were enough to make me wonder. If someone truly believed their safety depended on getting to another country, wouldn't preparing for that become their top priority? I pushed the thought aside. Everyone handles stress differently. Maybe I was being too harsh. Then Sarah started telling me about Jake's work history. He left another job today, she said one evening while we were making dinner. Why? They expected too much. What does that mean? He said the manager kept criticizing him. How long was he there? She looked away. 3 weeks. I nodded slowly. Hasn't this happened before? A few times. A few times turned out to be nearly every job he'd had over the previous 2 years. Whenever work became difficult, Jake left. Sometimes he blamed the manager, sometimes the coworkers, sometimes the hours. There was always a reason, but there was never any accountability. I couldn't help comparing him to Liam. Liam worked weekends at a grocery store while finishing school. He complained occasionally, like every teenager does, but he still showed up. He understood that responsibility wasn't always enjoyable. Jake seemed to believe responsibility was optional. A few days later, Sarah received another phone call. I could hear only her side of the conversation. No, Jake, you already asked me last month. She sighed deeply. I'll see what I can do. When she hung up, she looked embarrassed. He needs a little money. For what? He says he's behind on rent. How much? About $800. I raised an eyebrow. I thought he was working. He is. Then why can't he pay his rent? Sarah hesitated. Things have just been difficult. I didn't argue. It wasn't my place. But something about the situation didn't sit right with me. Over the next 2 months, those requests became more frequent. Sometimes it was rent, sometimes groceries, sometimes his car needed repairs. Once it was because his phone had been disconnected. The reasons changed. The pattern didn't. One evening, I finally asked Sarah a question that had been bothering me. Has he ever paid you back? She didn't answer immediately. I don't really keep track. That was answer enough. Then came the first conversation that truly changed the way I saw things. Jake called while Sarah was cooking dinner. She put him on speaker for a moment because her hands were full. I just need a few hundred more, he said casually. For what this time? Sarah asked. I've got some expenses. What expenses? It's complicated. I finally spoke. Jake, if we're going to help you move here, we need to know you're ready. I am. Then start acting like it. Silence. I continued. Make your resume. Keep a job. Save some money. Show us you're committed. His tone changed instantly. So you don't trust me? That's not what I said. It sure sounds like it. I'm asking you to prove you're serious. He laughed. You don't get it. No, I replied calmly. Help me understand. You've got a good life over there. You have no idea what it's like here. The call ended a few minutes later without resolving anything. Sarah looked frustrated. You were too hard on him. I don't think I was. He's under a lot of pressure. I understand that. No, Michael. I don't think you do. That conversation stayed with me, not because of what Jake said, because of Sarah's reaction. Every concern I raised seemed to have an explanation. Every missed responsibility became someone else's fault. Every bad decision came with a reason why it wasn't really his fault. It was as if she couldn't separate loving her son from protecting him from the consequences of his choices. Then another piece of the puzzle fell into place. Liam called one evening just to check in. Toward the end of the conversation, he casually mentioned something. Jake's been hanging around with a different crowd lately. What do you mean? I don't know. They're always partying? Has he said anything? Liam hesitated. I probably shouldn't be the one saying this. You can tell me. I think he's using again. The words hit me harder than I expected. Using what? I don't know exactly. But it's definitely not just weed. When I brought it up with Sarah later that night, she immediately shook her head. No. Liam seemed pretty convinced. Jake told me he stopped months ago. And you believe him? He's my son. I wasn't asking whether she loved him. I already knew the answer to that. What I was beginning to question was something much more difficult. Was helping Jake actually giving him a second chance? Or was everyone around him simply protecting him from facing the consequences of the life he had chosen? For the first time since Sarah asked me to bring them to Switzerland, I found myself wondering whether saying yes might actually be the worst thing I could do for him. And unfortunately, I was about to discover that I still didn't know the full truth. I was overthinking everything. Maybe Jake really was just overwhelmed. Maybe moving to Switzerland would give him the fresh start he desperately needed. Maybe all he needed was someone to believe in him. But the more I learned, the harder those maybes became to believe. One evening, Sarah and I scheduled a video call with Jake and Chloe. I figured it would be a chance to discuss practical things. Finding work, learning German, housing, the basics. When the call connected, Jake looked exhausted. His eyes were bloodshot. His face seemed thinner than I remembered. Chloe sat beside him on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She barely looked at the screen. After a few minutes of casual conversation, I pulled out a notebook. "All right," I said. "If we're serious about making this happen, let's make a plan." Jake nodded. "Sure. The first thing you'll need is a job. No problem. I've found several companies hiring entry-level warehouse workers. The pay is decent and they often help with paperwork." Jake shrugged. "Okay." I turned toward Chloe. "What kind of work experience do you have?" She looked confused. "I've never really worked." I smiled politely. "That's okay. Everyone starts somewhere." She shook her head. "I don't really want one of those jobs." "What kind of job are you looking for?" "I don't know yet." "Well, Switzerland is expensive. You'll both need stable income." She glanced at Jake before answering. "We'll figure it out when we get there." Something about that sentence immediately made me uncomfortable. Figure it out? This wasn't a vacation, it was immigration. People couldn't simply arrive and hope everything worked itself out. I continued. "Have either of you started learning German?" Jake laughed. "Not yet. It'll make finding work much easier. We'll learn after we move." Again. Everything was always something they'd do later. After the call ended, I closed my notebook. They don't seem very prepared. Sarah sighed. "They're scared." "I know. They've had a rough year." "I know. But fear doesn't replace a plan." She didn't respond. A week later, another surprise arrived. I was reviewing some documents for work when Sarah walked into my office. "Jake found an apartment online." "In Switzerland?" She nodded excitedly. "He wants to know if we think it's nice." She handed me her phone. The apartment was beautiful. Modern kitchen, 2 bedrooms, large balcony, right outside Zurich. Then I noticed the monthly rent. I almost laughed. "They can't afford this." "I know. So why are they looking at it?" Sarah hesitated. "They thought maybe we could help in the beginning." "Help?" "You know, until they get settled." I looked up. "What exactly does help mean?" "Maybe paying the deposit. That's several thousand francs. Just to get them started. And after that, they'll be working. They don't even have jobs. They will." "Sarah," she looked away. "I just don't want them to be homeless." Neither did I, but there was a difference between helping someone stand on their own and carrying them. The conversation ended without either of us changing our minds. Then Liam called. He almost never called me directly, which meant something was wrong. "Hey, Liam. Michael, like his mom there?" "She's grocery shopping." "Oh." His voice sounded nervous. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Is Jake really moving to Switzerland?" "That's the plan." There was a long silence. Finally, he spoke. "I don't think he's telling you everything." I sat down. "What do you mean?" "He lost another job." "I know. It wasn't because of his boss." "What happened?" "He stopped showing up." "Why?" Another pause. "Because he was high." The room suddenly felt smaller. "Liam, I've seen it. He disappears for days. Then comes home asking everyone for money. He says it's temporary, but it's getting worse. I rubbed my forehead. What about Chloe? She uses too. My stomach dropped. Are you sure? I wish I wasn't. When Sarah returned home, I told her everything. She immediately shook her head. Liam exaggerates. Why would he lie? He doesn't understand. I think he understands more than we do. She crossed her arms. Jake told me he's clean. Sarah, he promised me. I looked at her for several seconds. Then I quietly asked the question neither of us wanted to answer. If he's clean, where does all the money keep going? She had no answer. 2 days later, I finally got one. It wasn't from Jake. It wasn't from Sarah. It came completely by accident. Jake called while Sarah was in the shower. When I answered, he thought I was her. Hey, Mom. Jake, it's Michael. Oh. There was an awkward pause. Then I heard Chloe's voice in the background. Ask him if his place has enough room. Jake covered the phone for a second, but not long enough. We're not staying with them forever. We just need somewhere until they get us on our feet, another voice laughed. They've got Swiss money, they'll be fine. Jake returned to the call. Sorry about that, I didn't say anything. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I finally asked, Jake, what exactly is your plan when you get here? He hesitated. We'll stay with you for a bit. For how long? I don't know. Until we figure things out. The exact same words Chloe had used. Until we figure things out. Not when we get jobs. Not after we save enough money. Not after we become independent. Just figure it out. After we hung up, I sat alone in the living room for nearly an hour. For the first time, I wasn't worried about whether Jake would succeed in Switzerland. I was worried that he had no intention of trying, and deep down, I was beginning to realize something even more painful. Jake and Chloe didn't see Switzerland as an opportunity to build a new life. They saw it as an escape, and they expected Sarah and me to pay for it. What I still didn't know was just how much Sarah had already promised them behind my back. After that phone call, something changed inside me. Until then, I'd been looking for reasons to believe Jake. Now, I found myself looking for reasons not to. I hated that feeling. No one wants to think the person they're trying to help is taking advantage of them, especially when that person is family. For a few days, I kept my concerns to myself. I didn't want every conversation with Sarah to turn into another argument. I hoped maybe I'd misunderstood. Maybe Jake had simply misspoken. Maybe Chloe didn't realize how expensive Switzerland was. Maybe they really did plan to become independent. But then the requests started getting bigger. One evening, Sarah came home unusually cheerful. I've got good news. What happened? Jake found another apartment. I looked up from my laptop. Already? She handed me her phone. This one's cheaper. Cheaper was a relative term. The apartment still cost more than many people earned in a month. I handed the phone back. It's still impossible without jobs? I know. So, why are we looking at apartments? Sarah hesitated. They'll need an address. They'll need income first. They can't get settled without somewhere to live. I leaned back in my chair. Sarah, what exactly are you asking me? She took a deep breath. I was thinking, if the lease was under your name? For a moment, I honestly thought I'd misheard her. My name? Just until they get established. I stared at her. They've never paid rent consistently. They'll be different here. They've never kept jobs consistently. They'll change. They're actively using drugs. Her expression immediately hardened. We don't know that. Liam told us. Jake denied it. Of course he denied it. The room fell silent. Finally, she quietly asked, So you're saying no? I'm saying I'm not putting my financial future on the line for people who haven't shown they're ready. She looked hurt. I thought we were building a family. We are. Then why doesn't it feel like it? That question stayed with me long after the conversation ended, because I wasn't trying to reject her family. I was trying to protect ours. A few days later, I accidentally discovered something Sarah hadn't told me. She had been sending Jake money, not once, not twice, regularly. I wasn't snooping. She asked me to help organize some paperwork for taxes while she was at work. As I sorted through bank statements, I noticed several international transfers, 500 francs, 300 francs, 700 francs, nearly every month. The dates stretched back almost a year. That wasn't emergency help, that was support. When Sarah got home, I placed the statements on the kitchen table. She immediately knew why. You went through my account? You asked me to organize the paperwork. I was going to tell you. When? She didn't answer. How much have you sent him? I don't know exactly. It looks like thousands. He needed help. Every single month? She folded her arms. He's my son. I understand that. No, Michael, I don't think you do. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. I'm not asking you to stop loving him. I'm asking whether this is actually helping. He would have been homeless. Or maybe he would have learned to keep a job. Her eyes filled with tears. You don't understand what it's like to be a mother. No, I don't. But I do understand addiction. She looked surprised. My uncle spent 15 years destroying his life, while everyone around him kept rescuing him. I paused. Every time someone paid his bills, he had another month to avoid changing. Sarah looked away. I'm not rescuing Jake. Then what are you doing? She couldn't answer. A week later, things became even worse. Jake called late at night. Sarah answered immediately. I could hear him crying through the speaker. I can't do this anymore. Jake, calm down. They're after me. Who's after you? I messed up. What happened? I owe people money. Sarah's face turned white. How much? I don't know. I just need enough to get out. I'll help you. Before I could say a word, she'd already made the promise. I'll figure something out. After the call ended, I quietly asked, what did he owe money for? I didn't ask. You should have. He was terrified. So was I. She looked confused. I continued. Did you notice something? What? He never asked how. He never asked if we could. He just assumed we'd fix it. Sarah didn't respond. The next morning, I received a message from Jake, not to apologize, not to explain, just a list. Apartment deposit, furniture, plane tickets, living expenses, health insurance, phone, transportation. At the bottom, one final sentence. We'll pay you back once we're settled. There wasn't a timeline. There wasn't a budget. There wasn't even a thank you, just an expectation. It felt less like a request and more like an invoice. That evening, Sarah admitted something she'd been hiding for weeks. I already told them we'd help. I slowly looked up. What do you mean? I told them not to worry. My stomach sank. You promised them? I couldn't tell them no. You promised them my support without asking me. I thought you'd understand eventually. At that moment, I realized this was no longer just about Jake. It wasn't even about money. It was about trust. The woman I planned to marry had started making life-changing decisions on our behalf without including me. And the more she tried to protect Jake from the consequences of his choices, the more she was pushing us toward consequences of our own. What I still didn't know was that Jake's financial problems weren't simply the result of unemployment, they were hiding something far more dangerous. And the truth was about to destroy what little trust we had left. For the next several days, the apartment felt strangely quiet. Sarah and I still spoke. We still ate dinner together. We still shared the same home. But something invisible had settled between us. The trust that had once come so naturally now felt fragile. Every conversation seemed to end before it really began. Every silence lasted a little longer. I wanted to believe we could still fix this. But before you can solve a problem, you have to know what the real problem is. And I was about to discover that we had been fighting the wrong battle all along. It started with an unexpected phone call. Sarah was at work when her phone rang. She answered, expecting another call from Jake. Instead, it was her bank. I watched the color drain from her face. I don't understand, she kept saying. There has to be some mistake. When she hung up, her hands were shaking. What happened? The bank says I'm behind on loan payments. What loan? I don't have a loan. My stomach tightened. They said there are 2 personal loans under my account. How much? She whispered the number. Nearly 20,000 francs. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. There has to be fraud, I finally said. I've never borrowed that kind of money. She immediately called the bank again and arranged an emergency meeting for the following morning. Neither of us slept that night. We kept searching for explanations. Identity theft, bank error, administrative mistake. Anything except the possibility that was quietly forming in the back of my mind. The next morning, the bank manager placed several documents on the desk. They were approved using your online banking credentials. Sarah stared at the paperwork. I never signed these. The applications were completed electronically. The manager pointed toward the transfer history. The funds were transferred almost immediately after approval. To where? He turned another page. My heart sank. Several transfers had been sent to an account I recognized. Jake's. Sarah covered her mouth. No. The room fell completely silent. The manager looked between us. Do you know the account holder? Sarah nodded slowly. My son. She looked like someone had knocked the air out of her lungs. I never authorized this. The manager remained professional. If someone had access to your banking information, you'll need to file a police report. The drive home was painfully quiet. Finally, Sarah spoke. He knows my passwords. I looked at her. What? I gave them to him years ago. Why? In case he ever needed help paying bills while I was traveling. And he still had access? She nodded. Neither of us wanted to say the obvious. He hadn't stolen her identity. She had unknowingly handed him the keys. That afternoon, Sarah called Jake. She didn't yell. She didn't accuse him. She simply asked, Jake, did you use my account? Long silence. Then, I was going to tell you. My jaw clenched. You took out loans? I needed money. You forged my applications? I was going to pay it back. When? I don't know. You've destroyed my credit. I didn't mean to. Sarah's voice broke. Why didn't you ask me? Because you'd say no. Those 6 words changed everything. Not because they explained what he'd done. Because they proved he knew it was wrong before he did it. After the call ended, Sarah cried harder than I'd ever seen. Not because of the money, because for the first time she could no longer protect the image she'd created of her son. Reality had finally caught up. A few days later, another piece of the puzzle fell into place. Liam called again. This time, his voice sounded almost relieved. I think you deserve to know the truth. I'm listening. The guy Chloe keeps talking about? Her ex? Yeah. What about him? He's real. But he's not looking for them. I frowned. What do you mean? He got out of prison months ago. And? He moved to another city. He hasn't contacted either of them. I felt my pulse quicken. So why were they saying he was coming after them? Liam sighed. Because if everyone believed they were in danger, they'd help faster. I leaned back in my chair. So the threats were exaggerated, or completely made up. The realization hit me like a freight train. This entire plan, the urgency, the pressure, the desperate phone calls, the emotional manipulation, it had all depended on making Sarah believe there wasn't time to think. If she believed her son was in immediate danger, she'd never stop to ask difficult questions. She'd simply rescue him, and that was exactly what had happened. When I told Sarah what Liam had revealed, she didn't argue. She didn't defend Jake. She didn't make excuses. She simply stared out the window. I've been lying to myself. I sat beside her. You wanted to believe the best. I ignored every warning. She looked at me with tears running down her face. You tried to tell me. I gently took her hand. This isn't your fault alone. No, she whispered. It is. I confused love with protection. I thought saving him meant helping him. She paused. But all I've done is make it easier for him to keep destroying himself. For the first time since this nightmare began, we were finally standing on the same side. But knowing the truth didn't erase the damage. Sarah owed thousands of francs. Our relationship had been pushed to its breaking point. Jake was deeper into addiction than either of us had imagined, and despite everything that had happened, he still believed we would rescue him one more time. What he didn't realize was that the next decision Sarah and I made would change all of our lives forever. The weeks that followed were the darkest either of us had ever experienced. Not because of the money. Money can be earned again. What hurt was realizing how completely trust had been broken. Sarah barely recognized the person she'd become. She had spent years believing she was protecting her son. Instead, she'd unknowingly helped him destroy himself. Every time she'd paid his rent, every time she'd covered another bill, every time she'd believed another promise, she'd only delayed the moment he would have to face reality. One evening, I found her sitting alone at our kitchen table. The lights were off. The only glow came from the street lamps outside. "I keep replaying everything," she whispered. What if I had said no the first time? What if I hadn't kept making excuses? I sat beside her. "You did what you thought a mother should do." She slowly shook her head. "No. I did what was easiest for me." I looked at her, surprised. "It was easier to rescue him than to watch him struggle." She wiped away a tear. "And now we're both paying the price." Those words stayed with me, because she was right. We both were. Over the next month, the pressure only grew. Debt collectors began contacting Sarah about the unpaid loans. The bank froze parts of her account while the fraud investigation moved forward. Our evenings, once filled with laughter and wedding plans, became endless conversations with lawyers, banks, and paperwork. The engagement ring that once symbolized our future suddenly felt heavier than ever. For the first time since I'd proposed, I questioned whether we even had a future together. Not because I had stopped loving Sarah, I hadn't. But love alone couldn't rebuild trust. I kept asking myself the same painful question. Could I marry someone who had hidden so much from me? Someone who had made promises in my name without ever asking? I hated myself for even thinking it. But pretending the question didn't exist wouldn't make it disappear. Then came the call neither of us expected. It was Jake. His voice sounded completely different. Not angry, not demanding, just defeated. "They kicked us out." I closed my eyes. "What happened?" "I couldn't pay." "And Chloe?" "She left." "What do you mean?" "She packed her things this morning." There was a long silence. "I think she found someone else." For the first time, I didn't hear excuses. I heard a man who had finally run out of people to blame. "I've got nowhere to go," he said quietly. "No apartment, no job, no savings, no girlfriend." The friends he'd spent years partying with had disappeared the moment the money stopped. Even his biological father refused to take him back after years of broken promises. Every bridge had been burned. When Sarah hung up the phone, she cried again. But this time, they weren't tears of panic. They were tears of acceptance. "I can't save him anymore." I reached for her hand. "You never could." The hardest part wasn't saying no. The hardest part was knowing that saying yes would only delay the inevitable. For the first time in Jake's life, there was no one left to rescue him. No money waiting in a bank account. No apartment being arranged. No last-minute miracle. Just the consequences of every decision he'd spent years running from. It was a painful place to be. But sometimes, rock bottom is the first place where someone finally stops digging. As Sarah rested her head on my shoulder, neither of us knew what Jake would choose next. He could keep blaming the world, or for the first time in his life, he could finally choose to change. A week after Jake's call, Sarah asked me a question I never thought I'd hear. What if we help him differently? I looked at her. What do you mean? She took a deep breath. No more money. No more excuses. No more rescuing. If we're going to help him, it has to be the kind of help that actually gives him a chance. For the first time in months, we completely agreed. That evening, I called Jake. He answered almost immediately. "Michael, I'm going to make you one offer." He stayed quiet. "I won't pay your rent. I won't send you money. I won't buy you another phone. I won't pay your debts." Silence. "But I will pay for a rehabilitation program." Another silence. I'll cover every cent. And when you finish treatment, I'll personally help you find legal work. I'll help you build a resume. I'll help you prepare for interviews. If you prove you're serious, I'll even help you apply for jobs here in Switzerland. But only after you've earned that opportunity. Jake laughed bitterly. So that's it? That's everything. No cash? No. No apartment? No. You'd really leave me like this? I answered honestly. No. I'm refusing to leave you exactly where you are. He hung up. For months, we heard almost nothing. Occasionally, Liam would call with small updates. Jake was sleeping on friends' couches, then in shelters. Sometimes he'd disappear for weeks. Each time Sarah wanted to send money, she'd stop herself. It broke her heart. More than once, I found her sitting with her phone in her hand, tears in her eyes, trying to resist pressing the transfer button. Loving someone while refusing to enable them turned out to be one of the hardest things either of us had ever done. Then, nearly 6 months later, my phone rang. Jake. I almost didn't recognize his voice. It was calm, quiet. I've been thinking about your offer. I didn't interrupt. I can't do this anymore. Another pause. I'm tired. So, if it's still available, I'll go to rehab. A weight I hadn't realized I was carrying finally lifted from my shoulders. 3 weeks later, Jake checked himself into a treatment program. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks. There were difficult phone calls. There were days when he wanted to quit. But for the first time, every step forward belonged to him, not to someone else's wallet. Nearly a year later, I met him again. He looked healthier. His eyes were clear. He'd completed treatment, found steady work at a manufacturing company, and had been sober for several months. He wasn't perfect. Recovery rarely is, but he was finally taking responsibility for his own life. Before we left, he looked at me and quietly said something I'd waited a long time to hear. You were right, I smiled. No, you just became ready to hear it. As for Sarah and me, healing took time too. Trust doesn't return overnight. It's rebuilt one honest conversation at a time, one promise kept at a time, one healthy boundary at a time. We eventually got married in a small ceremony overlooking Lake Zurich. Nothing extravagant, just family, close friends, and a future we had nearly lost. Looking back now, I realize the biggest lesson wasn't about addiction, or money, or even betrayal. It was about the difference between helping someone and carrying them. Those two things can look almost identical at first, but one gives people the strength to stand on their own. The other quietly teaches them they never have to. If there's one thing I hope you take away from this story, it's this. Sometimes saying no is the most loving thing you can do. Real love doesn't protect people from every consequence. It gives them the chance to become stronger because of them. And if you're watching this while carrying someone else's burdens, ask yourself one honest question. Are you helping them build a better future? Or are you simply making it easier for them to avoid changing? Sometimes the hardest chapter in someone's life becomes the one that finally changes their story. Thank you for spending this chapter with me. Until the next one, take care of yourself and the people you love.